feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, I am exhausted. I didn't sleep well. I had some strange dreams.
Oh, were you dream walking, baby?
Maybe,
Or what?
maybe.
Yeah, it is a a multiverse morning here on Untitled Movie Reviews as we are reviewing spoiler-free Sam Raimi's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, Elizabeth Olsen, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Benedict Wong, Xochitl Gomez,
Shoshi.
Shoshi.
So,
Really, I've heard
like
it.
Sochi. Yeah.
Sochi,
Yeah.
Gomez, Michael Stuhlbarg, Rachel McAdams, and many, many more. Eric and I saw this movie in a double bill of multiverse yesterday with Everything Everywhere All at Once in IMAX as kind of a prelude. We also saw the teaser trailer to Avatar: The Way of the Water. You guys can check out our quick conversation on that over on the Untitled Movie Podcast channel. But yes, today, completely spoiler free, just initial impressions. We always say these are going to be short, and then we end up doing them for 40 minutes to an hour. But we will have a spoiler cast later in the week as the movie comes out for everyone to see on Thursday night or Friday morning. But this will be basically the only things we're going to touch on are things that were in the main trailers. I know that there's been a lot of like different teasers on TV lately that have kind of been spoiling different things here and there, but we're going to try to keep it mostly spoiler free, handle some of the plot details that you got from the trailers and things like that, but just overall impressions on the movie. I mean, if you guys have listened to us, you know how one of these go. Yes, Eric, I am also exhausted. We were recording this very early in the morning to try and hit the embargo. So not our usual recording time, but I always like when we kind of sleep on a movie and let it sit with us for a little bit, because I feel like initial impressions, I know we all try to get our tweets out, which we both of us did last night, and I think that can go one way or another with hyperbole on either one side of really loving something or hyperbole on another side of being disappointed. And I feel with every big Marvel movie, it is one of those things where there's so much anticipation for different reasons, and your initial thoughts, I need to sit with them. So I'm excited to kind of actually, like last night, think about it, sleep, and then kind of get into this. So without further ado, why don't we just get right into it? I don't know if people even need a plot synopsis, but I mean, we can kind of give like a little bit of context.
Right. I'm just going to quickly mention. So with the initial sort of social embargo break with
At
with the
midnight last
tweets,
night, yeah.
I already got two questionable responses. So my review was
Sure.
Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. A spirited Sam Raimi does what he can with tilted angles, crash zooms, and pop art to make this otherwise minor Marvel entry less of a drag. A lot of the plot retreads familiar ground covered in the vastly superior WandaVision. One retweet was a hater having early access is abysmal, and then another was minor Marvel entry. Bro, Doctor Strange is like the flagship character of the MCU right now.
I mean, neither of those people have seen the movie, so
Yeah.
I don't even pay attention to people like
Oh,
that.
no. I think it's kind of funny with like
Yeah.
thinking about, again, they haven't seen the movie, but on top of that, I said some positive things in there. One, I think the strongest aspect of this movie is the direction by Sam Raimi. And
Totally, yeah.
obviously this is also, as we're recording this is the day of the 20th anniversary of the first Spider-Man movie being released, if you want to feel old. And so with that, bringing him back into the Marvel fold, there is a certain expectation and also anticipation of having him kind of play within the subgenre again of the superhero movie, and then also on top of that being a more horror adjacent film, with certain references that are in both Doctor Strange and WandaVision specifically, that kind of tailor nicely or dovetail quite nicely into, Sam Raimi's Evil Dead mode. Now, is it Sam Raimi in, you know, pure gonzo, the quick and the dead, dark man kind of style? No. But I think the first and third act, especially in the third act, show a lot of what fans of Sam Raimi's style, are accustomed to in this film. So for that alone, I think that that's what kind of sets this movie apart from most other sequels within the MCU, is that it does have some personality when it comes to the actual style of the film. When you're looking at it from the point of view of the script, and we'll get into this a lot more when it comes to the spoiler cast, I think what WandaVision has already done um, was more interesting in terms of how it portrays characters within that storyline and how certain themes are brought back up within the context of this film. Elizabeth Olsen is a standout here, but I also think that the character was served a little bit better in WandaVision than she is here. And I kind of feel that Michael Waldron, who is the sole credited screenwriter, is trying to kind of hit those cues of like finding kind of, the not only the sound bites or the quotes for this film, but also in that kind of TV fashion of like hitting those marks of, Easter eggs, twists and turns, playing within the multiverse. And a lot of that continuity and, structure kind of hurts the more entertaining moments of the film where Sam Raimi is at play. Essentially, I mean, the plot is about, a person wanting to become more of a team player. Doctor Strange, like Tony Stark, has always been, the leader in his field of, whether it be tech or in this case, medical and
sorcery.
Yeah, and sorcery, and him trying to kind of let go and be more of a collaborator, and like that's like the whole purpose of
Daddy Strange instead of Doctor Strange.
exactly
With Peter and now America. Yeah. And I mean, I'll kind of echo what you're saying, maybe, in a similar light. Like, yeah, what I did love about the movie is Sam Raimi's direction. And I feel like it's something we've talked about with the Marvel movies and the MCU as a whole, is like, it's at its best when they let their kind of, whoever's directing them, put their kind of stamp on a movie. And we went all the way back to Shane Black and Iron Man 3 when, and I know that movie's divisive, and I'm sure this one will be kind of too, but like, I think whenever you let a personality put themselves into a movie, and it's not just that kind of cookie cutter kind of stamp of, a superhero movie or an MCU movie. I mean, I'm a huge MCU, fanboy almost, but like,
you missed a Leafs game because of it.
I know I'm wearing the jersey now. They won 5-0. Yes. But I think that's what, I really loved about this movie. And I agree with you, is that it is Sam Raimi through and through, maybe not to the extremes that you're saying in certain aspects. It is still very much a Marvel movie. But like Shane Black, like Taika Waititi,
James
like
Gunn.
the James Gunn and other directors that they've kind of let come in and actually make their movie. I think that's very much kind of the strong point of Multiverse of Madness. And then the other thing that I think is interesting to jump off what you were saying is like, I agree with you with the WandaVision stuff and the Wanda stuff here. But what I do find interesting is that they are doubling down on those Disney Plus shows being, very important, right? Like, this is as much a sequel to WandaVision as it is the first Doctor Strange movie. It's probably more of a sequel to WandaVision than it is the first Doctor Strange movie. I mean, we've seen Doctor Strange multiple times in, Infinity War, Endgame, Spider-Man, and it is playing on a lot of the stuff that we've seen him deal with, since that first movie. But I feel like this is very much a follow-up to WandaVision, and that's kind of interesting to me, of those Disney Plus shows always people will go, well, it's television, it's not essential viewing, you can watch it if you want, but like you don't need to for a lot of the Disney Plus shows. And I think this really proves that, like, this is an interconnected universe. And if you did not watch WandaVision, a 9 episode, right, a 9 episode 10 episodes TV series, you will lose a lot of the context and lead in on this series. You might be very confused, or on this movie, you might be very confused at, like, certain major plot elements. Overall, I think I liked it. I don't know if I love it. I think I like it more than I did even getting out of the movie last night after sleeping on it. But for me, I think that first act is kind of rough. It takes kind of a while to get into it, and I feel like, you know, the Sam Raimi-ness of it all, I think is, I've never been a huge Sam Raimi guy. Like, I appreciate him, and if you vibe with his style, I think you'll vibe with this movie. Um, for the most part. But that first act, I don't know what it was, but it was just, I'm like, man, I am not really into this at all. Whether it's like a clunky, exposition dumps here and there, you like,
McClunky, please.
yeah, just the kind of the setup of everything. I'm like, I don't know, like nothing super interesting visually or plot it was happening. And then it kind of takes that first act to kind of settle in, and I feel like when the multiverse is broken open and the movie can kind of go a little bit wild and Sam Raimi can put some of those horror elements into the movie, the villain can kind of shine. I think the movie ends up being, pretty entertaining and maybe not top tier MCU. And I think that's maybe just a personal thing of, like, Doctor Strange has never been that character for me that, like, really gets me going. Like, I just like I really I the first Doctor Strange movie, I know some people love it, and I think there's some interesting stuff there visually and stuff like that. But um it's just never, I rewatched it like a couple days ago, and I'm like, I like this movie, but like it never gets me to those highs that some of the other Marvel movies do. And I feel like this is the same. And there was a lot of build up, a lot of hype leading into the multiverse stuff. We just, got a great multiverse movie and Everything Everywhere All at Once. We got the multiverse in Loki and What If, and
Which I
two
also
other
think,
Disney.
I think, like, to your point with WandaVision, I think, like, if you have seen also Loki and What If, you don't necessarily have to see those two other ones
No.
like you do WandaVision, but if you have, they help
Oh,
quite a bit.
definitely help a lot. Um, but I think it's, once it kind of gets past that first act and over those kind of humps, I do, like I said, think it was kind of thoroughly entertaining. I think the Sam Raimi-ness of it all really works in I think the second and third act, like, and that's kind of, again, the strongest point of this movie. I think if you like him, there's a lot of him in this movie, and maybe it doesn't let him go to 11, but kind of lets him go to like 7 or 8, which is like a lot,
Yeah, this
like
isn't
more
for the
than
love
I
of the game. So,
no. And I think that, like, that's more than I expected in this, like, and that's kind of, love it or hate it, it's in there. And I think at times it can be campy, at times, which is him, at times it can be genuinely maybe not scary, but like, Marvel scary, like for
I think
kids it
it's,
would be
yeah, I think
scary.
it's a good,
I'm
like,
like,
first horror movie, and, like, you look
yeah,
at, like, what this did compared to Shazam, right? In
yeah,
terms of, like Sam, the other thing that Sam Raimi has always been really good with is tone. He's able to balance both humor and horror in a way that I feel a lot of other American filmmakers aren't able to do. This movie's not as funny as the Evil Dead trilogy in any way whatsoever, but tonally, if you have seen some of Sam Raimi's earlier stuff, the way that he kind of, bounces back and forth between the genres, you can see that here, where when you go with the kind of light scares or, the POV shots that remind you of, like, the Deadites from, the
yeah.
Evil Dead movies, or Drag Me to Hell, or how characters are kind of like put through the ringer, like Ash, or multiple characters that are of the same person. We've seen that in the original trailer, which it feels like Waldron's script really is a combination of continuity in developing the multiverse and the MCU further, and then also trying to tailor it to Sam Raimi's, sensibilities. And with that, you kind of get a mixed bag of a film, even though
A messy movie for sure.
even I do think that this film again does have more personality than
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the minor to mid-tier MCU films, in the same way that I think it's a better movie also than Spider-Man 3, but at least with
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man 3, which is not a good movie, it is somewhat memorable because at that point in Sam Raimi's career, he was kind of fighting against what the producers were asking him to do in that film, and with this you can tell that he's just kind of going with the flow.
Yeah, where I feel like in a similar sense, maybe, coming in late and, Waldron already kind of working on the script and working with him, obviously. But like, I don't think it's like those Spider-Man movies of being like wholly invested in all three and then even fighting for, there's the Venom stuff and not wanting that character in the movie and losing that battle and kind of being jaded about that whole thing. Um, but it's nice to see him kind of come back and step into, familiar territory, but then also blending, like in Spider-Man, he was able to do a little bit of that horror adjacent stuff. I mean, that Doc Ock scene is obviously iconic and one of the best ever, and better than anything in this movie. But like, I do like that he's able to step in and go, okay, I made 3 Spider-Man movies. I basically, launched this with X-Men to being as big as superhero movies are today. Let me come back, kind of see what the MCU is doing. I think he's a perfect choice, right? When you're talking about a multiverse and different versions of a character and different versions of things, like it's interesting pulling this guy out who directed 3 of the biggest superhero movies of all
And
time.
also Darkman. I mean,
And,
Darkman
and
was the
yeah,
movie that, even though it's not based on a comic book, it is a
it is a
superhero
superhero
story,
movie.
and
Yeah.
that's what, like, he wanted to do Batman Forever. And I think
Yeah.
also Tim Burton is an interesting comparison here, because part of what I love about early Sam Raimi, you're talking about like the Evil Dead movies into, Darkman and into the early 90s, is that part of the sort of appeal of his style is this weird combination of live action and stop motion animation, where like it's a
Hmm.
weird hybrid of the two. And I feel like, the same thing with Tim Burton having an animation background, that over the years and with the progression of technology, some of that is lost, and or at least it's undercut with the CGI, where their
Yeah.
personalities is kind of, it's diluted a little bit more, and like you kind of lose what kind of made them special to begin
Yeah.
with, and them not having to worry about post production, or not, or them not having to, or them not being as hungry to put their signature style on things. Because again, Sam Raimi, I rewatching those Evil Dead movies, I realized that how much I love him as a filmmaker. And
Hmm.
he came up at around the same time as the Coen brothers. I mean, they worked on Crime Wave together. He's in a lot of, like he pops up in Miller's Crossing, and there are actors that are used in Hudsucker Proxy for the Coen brothers. And so, like, the Coens are on a batting average of like 9 out of 10. Raimi's more
Hmm.
like a 6 or 7.
Sure.
But when he what he does with the camera is style over substance, but the style of how the camera moves and sort of progresses the narrative is groundbreaking and innovative. And you look at what he did with that first Evil Dead movie, which again, part of it is very much like, showy and showing off, like, okay, the camera's going to be moving, and we're going to be doing like a lot of Three Stooges stuff, and it's going to be weird in terms of its tone, because at that point, you had a lot of slasher movies that were coming out in the late 70s, early 80s, and the Evil Dead, and then Evil Dead 2, and then Army of Darkness get progressively more comedic as they go along.
Sure. Yeah.
And even the Spider-Man movies, I think the Spider-Man movies, it unintentionally with Spider-Man 3, but I think the first 2 Spider-Man films do have a lot of comedy, where
Oh yeah.
the comedy in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness doesn't work
No,
as
if
well.
I agree with that completely. There's maybe a couple things that I laughed at, and I mean we sat beside each other, and I don't think either of us really like laughed all that much. And I don't necessarily think I need a Doctor Strange movie to be, funny, but you do expect that coming from Raimi, if he was allowed to inject a little bit more into that. And I think there are moments that get to that. Like I know what you're talking about with Raimi, where it's either that slapsticky kind of thing or the campiness kind of thing that like, and I think the Spider-Man movies have that. The Evil Dead movies obviously have that. And I think there are little moments here and there that you can kind of see that creeping through. And I think, you'll either go, ugh, I don't like that at all, or you'll kind of be into it. And then I think the kind of MCU jokes that they throw in there, like the kind of more quippy, script written kind of jokes that, like, I think much like Eternals, just kind of falls flat in the movie. Like every kind of quip, it's like 1 in 10 maybe hit, where you kind of hope that, again, 6 or 7 out of 10 hit. Like in a James Gunn movie, even going back to Suicide Squad or something like that, even in his DC stuff, it's like he throws so much at you that you're going to be constantly laughing, even if half of them don't work. Where in this, it doesn't throw a ton at you. And I feel like, there are a few moments where I kind of laughed at something Doctor Strange would quit back, or Wong, or whatever. But, there's a ponytail joke that I laughed at,
Which
and
is
I think you
probably the
did too.
funniest line.
Yeah.
Because you think of Steven Seagal specifically, like
Yeah.
it's almost like riffing on guys, not with man buns, but
Yeah.
specifically like that late 80s, early 90s, ponytail look that Seagal brought in.
Yeah, but I feel like if you can remember the one joke you laughed at, then you didn't laugh at that much in the movie, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's fine. And but going back to the Raiminess of it all, yeah, like I agree with you that like there's a lot of that camera movements you're talking about. There's the kind of the kind of weird like transitions. There's kind of that, you mentioned the pop art, kind of like it always laughs in the Spider-Man movies when they do that kind of montage of Peter like thinking and all the kind of images coming up on screen. And there's one of those in this movie. And like, it's just the music choices from Danny Elfman, like
Who's going full
are
on Beetlejuice at times
yeah,
in
it's
this.
like it's really kind of interesting that they let him do his thing. And I kind of applaud them for it. And I don't think it always works. I do think it's messy. And I think that all comes a lot from the plotting and the script standpoint. Like how the villain in the movie should be an interesting conversation, which I think is like a spoilery thing in itself. So we won't
Yeah.
really go deep into that. And I think when it comes to Doctor Strange, the character, like following up on that first movie, if you are going to talk about it being a sequel to the first one, like I agree with you that it is this guy who's trying, again, after I think leading from Spider-Man as well, dealing with Peter Parker, and then leading right into America Chavez in this movie. Like, I think it's interesting of him taking this mentor role or this daddy role that I joked about, Daddy Strange, where he's just like, there are these kids who need his help, and he's sympathetic towards them. And I think they do an interesting job of kind of giving more depth to that. Like, I don't know if there's a lot there, but like, I think they do enough to kind of make you buy into him caring about America Chavez, even though I don't like, I think she's good in the movie, and they use her, not sparingly. She's a big part of it, but
Well,
like,
she's a plot
I don't,
device. I think that's the biggest
yeah,
problem with that character. It's not so much Xochitl Gomez, who
yeah,
I think is trying her best with how the character is written, but she is literally sort of the
yeah,
mechanism to start, the
totally.
multiverse jumping, and
And you don't get
she's
to know a
treated
ton about her
as
other than,
yeah, other
yeah,
than one moment, and that moment
which is
again
a
is
lot
going
of,
to be a conversation starter as
yeah,
well, in terms of how Marvel represents things
sure.
within the MCU and how little they do it.
And that's a
So
lot of just showing you and like, or telling you, like, you don't get a lot of depth from that character other
no.
than like, the very basic, like, I've been ripped from my home kind of thing, and someone's coming after me. And like you said, it's mostly a plot device. But
I kind of want
and
to
then
know the origin story behind her jacket, though. I would be very
okay,
curious about that, because
like how she got that made.
yeah,
That
because
denim
because
jacket.
we the one
Well,
kind of
she's traveled to many
that's what I'm
dimensions,
thinking,
right?
because I
So
don't think she got it from her universe. So, and that's all I'll say with that. But like, that
yeah,
was, I was just kind of thinking about that while watching. It was like, yeah, that her universe does not, they've evolved past denim jackets.
Yeah. The other thing I will say, more violent than I thought, and probably one of the more violent, PG-13 kind of Marvel movies. Like, I feel like this is as violent as you could maybe get. And I know they've had violence and blood and chopping Thanos' head off. A lot of the times it's like alien characters that are getting butchered, and then the other stuff is just kind of implied. But I would say this movie, like you said, a good introduction to, like, there's enough horror in here, whether it's Evil Dead adjacent stuff with, or just like straight up kind of like, pretty violent sequences where I'm like, like there were multiple times where I'm like, damn. I'm like, I cannot believe they went as hard as they did, with some of the, the death and violence in the movie. And I come, I'm like, all right, good for you guys for committing to that, because I just did not expect it.
Yeah, I like, again, that goes into, Sam Raimi kind of having fun with the visuals, but it
Yeah.
also is a conversation that we should have in the spoiler cast, because I think, again,
Oh,
it
totally.
undermines the MCU's overall style in a way, because, like, we'll get into it further, and we
hmm
apologize if we're sounding a little too cryptic. We just want people to go in, and enjoy this
Totally.
movie if they watch this review. And yeah, I think the strongest part of this film is Raimi's work behind the camera by far, and it's slightly better than the first Doctor Strange. But I think, again, like, some of the problems that we had with the episode of What If are here as
Yeah.
well. I think that, visually speaking, like, I'm not talking about sort of the images, I'm talking more about just the look. It's still very televisual and digital looking, and again, some of the visual effects in that first act, even though I did like the HP Lovecraft kind of creature that they're
Yeah, I like
fighting,
the look of
which,
Gargantuan. Yeah.
again, that first episode of What If, if you've seen it, that also kind of adds context to that
Totally.
type of
Yeah.
creature. Um, but it just kind of feels like there are two movies there, and a lot of the exposition and world building, or continual world building, also gets in the way, because it's like every
Yeah.
time something happens or they move on to another place in time, it's like, well, we have to stop and explain this, or have somebody explain this, for
hmm
a good, like, 5-10 minutes, and, like,
Yeah,
that
and that's
also
the
eats up
clunkiness
time.
that I'm mentioning.
Yeah.
Like, I just, a lot of that in that first act of a lot of the setup, I'm like, oof, I don't know if this dialogue's really good or this exposition is great. And like, even following the plot throughout the entire movie, you're like, I don't know if I completely buy into this, but like, I'm having a good time when it finally kicks in. It's just like, if I think about this too hard or I kind of dissect it, which we will do in the spoiler cast, is just like, I don't know if it completely works. But I had a good time. I liked it. I didn't love it. Which sounds like a Doctor Strange movie to me. And like, I'm all for hiring directors with distinct styles and putting those into the movie, because I feel like that makes them at least more interesting. And I'm completely with you where I would still take this over some of the kind of you know paint by numbers kind of Marvel movie, and you kind of know what that is. And again, anyone listening who thinks I'm insulting it, no, I love these movies. I rewatch them every single year, basically, like all 33 of them. So, and I think even those ones that I'm talking about of the paint by numbers Marvel movies, I still enjoy for what they are. I just kind of prefer them to have a little personality, which this movie does. I think it just kind of struggles when it comes to the plotting and kind of the script and how everything kind of plays out. And again, we're being very cryptic and not even touching on so much that's in this movie, because I feel like a lot of the stuff you can talk about is that first act stuff, which is the stuff I don't really love. um and a lot of the stuff from the second and third act, you can't even like kind of reference, because it kind of turns at one point and there's so much there. But
There is something I
yeah.
wanted to ask you, and I was thinking about this while watching it. Do you think that if we had seen this movie before Spider-Man No Way Home, that maybe it would have had a stronger effect
Yeah.
overall? or
and Everything Everywhere All at
yeah,
Once.
that movie is in a category all
I
its
know.
own.
It's just like
But
I
I'm
agree
thinking
with you
just
that
like with Spider-Man No Way Home, which also obviously has the Sam Raimi connection
yeah.
in that movie, but that film feels like the highs in that movie
Yeah.
are emotionally earned and also just completely captivating, and like you kind of feel, whether it's, and it is somewhat manipulative as well, but like you kind of feel the excitement of that. You're riding the high of that, and I kind of feel like having the next movie be another one of these kind of major event films within the MCU, also playing with the multiverse. um it kind of lessens it a little bit. Like if this
Yeah.
maybe was before, maybe I would have liked it a little bit more with like some of like the initial kind of shock value of
And
it all.
weirdly it could have been before, and
Yeah.
that's not really a spoiler. Like this doesn't directly it references Spider-Man, but literally it's like a line of dialogue that they added in. And it's not really even and that's not a spoiler. Like it's not because of the events of Spider-Man. Like you and originally this was supposed to come out before Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
Like so it would have been interesting to have those flipped, and the events of this movie causes something to start off, Spider-Man, or kind of deals with it that way. And I think maybe you are absolutely right, where if we were kind of introduced to multiverse stuff, not introduced, we obviously Loki and What If and the things that I'm talking about, but or we talked about, but yeah, I that would have been very interesting. And I feel like it was a tough act to follow after this huge event movie that I think nails every moment that it's going for, where it had an uphill battle of, it's like kind of, we talk about this and joke about Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I don't think I like this more than Ant-Man and the Wasp personally, but like,
I like this more
um,
than Ant-Man as well.
yeah, same. The Ant-Man movie's just not, I don't know, they're fine. But I, yeah, it's a tough act to follow, and I feel like maybe that's why I'm a little bit softer on it, because yeah, we just had a great multiverse movie, and um even when it comes to some of the surprises, the last thing I will say, I'm not spoiling anything, it just means I think there's still a lot that you'll be surprised about, even if you know a lot of stuff going into this movie. Like I will say, I had like probably the biggest spoiler in this movie I had spoiled for me, and I think Eric did too, but like it didn't affect my opinion on the movie. And I think you got to see it in context, and I feel like even if some of the things that are in the movie, like there are
It's how it
still
happens, right?
surprises
Like
there.
you
Yeah.
need to watch and
And
see how it
yeah,
happens.
and there are surprises that I don't think maybe a lot of people have seen. But yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, Eric. And I think because of things with COVID having to be mixed around, I think that's why the MCU right now, I think, is still trying to kind of get its footing again. Like I feel like it doesn't feel disjointed. It feels more individual, which is totally fine, but still very connected, obviously. Like I said, if you didn't watch WandaVision, you're a lot of this, you're gonna be like, wait, why? And then so I don't know. Like I feel like it's interesting right now. Like everything feels like singular movies, which I'm down for. But I feel like when it comes to a cohesiveness of everything, it feels like they are kind of trying to like pivot, and like you can really tell like, oh, they had to add that line of dialogue, or you know the post-credit scenes of movies, we're trying to figure out what these are going to lead into or how they tie into one another, right? So, and we'll talk about all of that in the spoiler cast, I think, more in details, because we are tiptoeing and dancing around
Yeah. And
a
and
lot
I
of
think
things.
also
So
Spider-Man, where both of us like that character a lot more
yeah,
than Strange, so we just have that investment in the character as well.
I have
Um
nothing against Doctor Strange, but
Doctor
it's
Strange
something we've
somebody
talked
is
about.
that I don't know how you feel, but like I feel like I should really like that character because of
Yeah,
like the macabre and sort of the
yeah,
other
that's more
worlds
your
and
thing than
things.
my thing,
Yeah,
but
but
yeah,
but the horror stuff, like
totally,
specifically,
yeah.
and it just doesn't connect. And like having both,
Hmm.
Scott Derrickson and Sam Raimi direct these movies, you can tell that Kevin Feige wants to make these kind of, genre skewed kind of films, but he hasn't really like he's trying to balance the ship of like, okay, well, we have to, have enough here to kind of bounce off into the next thing or kind of set up other stuff. And like, that's the price you sometimes pay when, a movie like this is still somewhat connected to other movies where, if you get a third or fourth in a series and it's kind of doing its own thing at that point, then you can kind of say, okay, Shane Black, Taika Waititi, take the wheel and do your thing. And this kind of feels like it's still kind of important to the MCU's phase 4 overall, where it's kind of like, well, we need this movie to still have a lot of the continuity up front and be as sort of memorable or the selling point to the story as, bringing in someone like Sam Raimi to kind of be the director behind this. Because again, like that doesn't mean anything to
There's
people
some
that
Iron
are
Man
going
2 in there. I understand. I get what you're saying. Where it's like still,
and the Sam
setting
Raimi
up the
thing doesn't
future.
mean anything to probably a lot of MCU people who are going to see this for
Sure.
the MCU first.
But they might go the guy who made the Spider-Man movies, right? Like,
but I'm talking
I
about
think,
someone like my mom who is going to see
Or my
Doctor
mom,
Strange because it's an MCU movie and Benedict Cumberbatch is in it, and it's continuing something that they put so much time into already, where they're not necessarily being like, oh, it's the guy who directed Spider-Man,
Yeah, that's fair. Unless they talk to us about it.
Yeah.
I liked it. I am excited. Oh, the other thing I was going to say before I get into that, I like Doctor Strange in team-up movies more than I like him in
Like the
individual
Hulk.
movies. I'm realizing. Like, I like him when he's part of an ensemble, part of a team. And this movie is very much an ensemble at times too, but like it is a Doctor Strange movie and a Wanda Maximoff movie. But like, I do like him in team-up movies and when he was in Spider-Man and things like that. So it's just maybe that's how I prefer my Doctor Strange, but I am excited to see this again with a public crowd. I feel like a lot of these moments will be a lot of fun with a crowd that's like really into this. So I'm excited to see it again. And like a lot of these movies, I feel like these first impressions for me are a mixed bag of like expectation versus thoughts versus all this kind of stuff. And then when I see it a second time is really kind of when I get clarity of how I feel about a movie. So I'm excited to see it again on Thursday in IMAX. So that's saying something. Like, again, I've had no desire to rewatch Eternals. So, and then there's something like, again, but I even comparing to recent MCU stuff, like when I got out of Shang-Chi, I was like, holy shit, like that was exhilarating. I really loved that, where I never had anything here that really got to those highs other than kind of going, oh, it's fun that Sam Raimi injected himself so much into the movie. So I'm going to give the movie a 3.5, which is about on par with the first Doctor Strange for me. And that's kind of got a little bit of an MCU boost because I just like these movies overall and I like this universe. But I agree with Eric where I would put this slightly above the first Doctor Strange. And, in that kind of middle or lower third of MCU movies. And that's saying like, I like, 2/3 of this list. So, or, almost 3/4 of this list of every movie and show that they've done. So 3.5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5. And where I'm coming from is not only judging it just based on like the Marvel, universe. I'm judging this also as a Sam Raimi movie. And
Totally. Yeah.
It's nowhere near the top of like Spider-Man 2 or Evil Dead 2 or Darkman or A Simple Plan. It kind of falls somewhere between like, The Gift and Oz the Great and Powerful. It's just somewhere
it's a little bit better than Oz, I think.
It is, but there are similar, like Oz also does a lot of things where it's, or like you can tell that Sam Raimi took a lot of inspiration and influence from the Wizard of Oz,
Totally.
stories, and especially in Army of Darkness and Army of Darkness, Oz the Great and Powerful, and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness would make an interesting Sam Raimi triple bill because they all are very similar in their constructs in one way or another. And
That's
so
true.
with that, I'm looking at it from that point of view. It's one of those things where it's like, I'm really happy he's back and I'll take whatever I can get in terms of just like him as a filmmaker, not as a person, as a filmmaker. I want to make that clear. So I'm just happy that he is making another movie, and that, you know, he is getting to add some of those Raimi-isms in there, and so for that I will give it a 3 out of 5. But it is still kind of like somewhat underwhelming overall, and again, it does not ever reach that high of a Spider-Man No Way Home moment. You know,
Yeah,
that was
totally.
voted on by the Oscars and made the top 5. So
It doesn't hit a Flash enters the Speed
no,
Force.
but what does?
It's better than Justice League, just so
Oh yeah,
everyone
yeah.
knows. Thank you all for listening or watching. We really do appreciate it. Please just don't yell at us in the comments. I mean, you probably will because you shut it off 2 minutes in and you're not even listening to this. For people who got this far, thank you. And you probably won't yell at us. We have other stuff that we would love for you guys to check out right now. We have an Avatar, The Way of the Water conversation you guys can go check out on the Untitled Movie Podcast channel. And like Eric mentioned and I mentioned throughout this episode, we will have a spoiler cast for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which you can get. I'm debating Thursday night when the movie comes out or Friday morning, probably Friday morning, just to give people the Thursday night to go see it. So you guys can check that out and get our spoiler-filled thoughts on the movie. And there is some stuff to talk about, so I'm excited to kind of do that with Eric. One-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterboxd for Untitled_movies. You can get all of our reviews, our ratings, links to the YouTube videos, all that kind of stuff over there. And then, as always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews on RogersTV.com/CinemaScene and on all the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Groovy.